Hello and welcome to the July edition of the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Fiona Taylor, and later on I'll be joined by my colleagues here at Garden Organic, Chris Collins and Dr. Anton Rosenfeld. It's July, the time when we start to bring in the harvest, and the garden is ablaze with colour. I hope you're enjoying it. Later on, we'll be joined by the seed detective himself, Adam Alexander. The last time we had Adam on the podcast, he told us about his journeys around the world, discovering an incredibly broad range of traditional vegetables. This time, he tells the story of the people behind our global food culture, who he calls the accidental seed heroes. In the postbag, we answer your questions on aphids, problems with spinach and chard plants, and tomato leaf curl. But first, I'm off to join Chris in the potting shed. Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm very good, Fiona. You?
Yeah, very well.
Been enjoying the sunshine.
That's been enjoying the sunshine, indeed. What a lovely few weeks we've had in lots of ways. But just before we start, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time remembering a wonderful horticulturalist who's died very recently, who's someone you knew really well, Chris.
Yeah, the passing of Sarah then, yeah. And it's a sad moment. I found her a very inspirational woman. She was very pioneering in many ways with the work she did in Bristol and identifying neglected sites and using them for food growing. But she wasn't just about horticulture, she was about people as well,
yes.
Marrying those two things together. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, which is another thing I liked about her. She upset people if she wanted to and she didn't care. She had a big, strong message to get over, a big, strong, positive message. And I found her very inspirational. I interviewed her a few years ago for this podcast. And when she interviewed me on the little allotment site she was running, and everything about it was just great. The positivity and who she was and what she was trying to do. And obviously our thoughts go out to Noah, a boy and her husband at this time. It's a loss for horticulture. She's going to be missed. You know, she was dynamic. She was a force. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And she had an amazing Instagram channel, and I'm sure that's still there if people want to go and look up and find out a bit more about her and see if there are ways to carry on some of the stuff that she, was so passionate about. And I think she had it right. She was absolutely wanting to make sure people had the opportunity to grow some of their own stuff, to get stuck into healthy food, and all of this passion she had culminated in connecting where you live with what you eat.
Yes, yeah. She was active. She believed in getting people involved. She had a lot of faith in people, and that's what I liked about horticulture. Is a game of growing plants, but also of bringing people together. And she recognised that, and she recognised that early on.
Yeah, indeed. And we've been involved in the last few weeks in a really big event, bringing lots of people together. We did a garden at BBC Gardeners World Live. I know you were involved in that. I think Sarah would have really liked it.
I hope so. I really hope so, because it had, to me, it had all those facets of what we're all about, that mixed cropping, wildlife, all the messages we get out there, and viewing your garden as this diverse space where it's, for want of a word, it's almost like a stage, because everything's changing all the time. If you decorate your front room, that's what it'll look like till you decorate it again. But a garden is constantly moving around and changing and evolving, and things are coming and things are going. At the basis of the design, when me and Emma were trying to get at, was trying to encompass that, have an area that was full of ideas and activity. And I really, really loved the garden. It wasn't over-egged. It wasn't too complicated. It just had all those little messages in it. And I just felt it was, and the public reflected it. I think you could see those ideas. And I really enjoyed doing it. It wasn't easy. The ground was like concrete. My wrists were a bit sore after it. That was sore just from digging out the holes for the bigger plants. But definitely worth it. And I think as an organisation, we benefited from it greatly.
And the garden was called Rooted in Nature, and it was fundamentally about everything you could do to align your garden with the natural processes and the ecosystems around us. But absolutely key to it was mixing up your planting, wasn't it?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly got a lot of interest. It's quite brave planting. That's what I do in my allotment. I band colour and pollinate through my edibles. And I find that my pest and disease is much lower as a result of that. It looks amazing. Yeah. So I just think people are a bit scared. I'll grow some veg here and I'll grow some flowers over it. And that, it's not binary, you throw the two together. Yeah. And I just think that really works well. I think you get healthier plants. I think it just absolutely hits the spot. So you're getting the pollinators in, you're getting your food, you've just got this really diverse site, which is healthier for the soil, healthier for wildlife as well. Yeah.
We had a wonderful wildlife pond on the garden. I mean, really good size for a show garden. It was a really good size pond, and it was installed by a company called Wild Water, and they're just absolutely passionate, aren't they, about bringing your wildlife into your garden through your pond. But I mean, I kind of feel like every garden needs some form of water if we are going to be rooted in nature and we are going to support nature. So tell us about the pond.
Well, Harry, he was only a young guy. He was very passionate about it. And I was impressed because the art of doing it in that environment, that situation, is to do it look like it's been there years. And he's just pulled it off, I think. So obviously it's very natural with the rock of the planting around it. He was very methodical how he did it. So And having those little touches like making sure the rock flows into the pond so you've got access for amphibians to come in and out. And then lots of marginal plantings so the insectivorous life, etc., can sit and have somewhere to hide. So it's very, very art form of how we made it look like it had been there quite a long time. Yeah. But all that, and then that enables us to talk about the key messages of why do you want water in your pond? Well, it's because it's going to bring the wildlife in.
One of the questions we had from people who were coming to look at the garden was, okay, it looks absolutely fantastic, but how do I harvest that lettuce that's right in the middle of that bed there without trampling on everything else? You know, which is, of course, something we say, you know, try and plant so that there isn't bare soil. But, of course, then perhaps it's difficult to harvest.
Well, it's a good point because you have to prepare. I mean, stepping stones is the obvious one. Just leave pockets where you can get in and do that. Make sure width as well. I mean, we were taught as horticulturists, beds, maybe ornamental beds even, but it shouldn't be more than 1.5 meters wide so you can get in and weed them out and stuff.
Right.
So width maybe comes into it. It's quite interesting. On the parks many years ago, I would use 2 milk crates and a plank and I'd lie on my bed and clip bedding. So I wonder whether you could do that if the sun's out. It's got a good way to sunbathe as well.
I'm trying not to visualise that. So you're lying across your crop.
Yeah, you're above it, basically.
Above it.
Yeah, but that's probably going a little bit far.
You never know. We know there's a few of us who are that obsessed. So I can imagine.
But yeah, just consider it when you're planting. Okay, if that's out of reach of me, put a stepping stone in, okay? Yes. Or leave a little gap or leave a little pathway. So just bear it in mind when you're planting.
Yes, think about it ahead of time.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, the judges loved it. We were awarded a Silver Merit Medal, which we were absolutely thrilled with. And, of course, at the end of the week, you'll go home and then you look at your garden and think, right, I've neglected this for the last week or two because I've been busy with work. So how is it all looking, Chris, in your allotment now that you've had a few days to bring it back up to speed?
Well, I'm on top of things a little bit. Obviously, we came out of that, and which is such an intense, busy period. I mean, all praise to everyone at Garden Organic. Emma and her team worked really hard on it. But there's behind the scenes, everybody got involved in it, and I think it was a really quite, there's a lot of camaraderie in it, and I love that about it. And but you get back, you're right, you get back, and I went out to my kitchen garden that I look after, and it was just sea deep in weeds. It's just incredible because the water's been going on, the sun's been out, and so the veg is growing like rapid, but so is the competition. Yeah. So I had a couple of days of very intense pulling out of the competition and adding to my compost bin. But I'm on top of that now. Both my allotment and my kitchen garden are full. They're packed out, and I'm starting to now crop. Yesterday I had a load of potatoes, first tomatoes, I had carrot, I had shallots, onions. Yeah. So it's starting to give now, and it'll be on from there. So certainly it's been a couple of days of really hard graft getting back on top of it, but that's the nature of the business.
Well, let's talk about the crops at the moment. So I've been talking about the 5 I wanted to focus on. I'm afraid I've managed 3. And there's 2 that I need to talk to you about. I did not yet get my parsnips in. I just wonder if we could stop and talk about parsnips a little late. I understand that, but I think I might still do it anyway and just not worry about how big those parsnips may or may not get. But you say you've got quite a lot of top growth on yours at the moment.
Yeah, the heat tends to put them on put on foliage, basically. Yeah. That's what tends to happen. So you look like, I can see mine actually, they're a good 2 foot in height. And they're deep green, and they, you get that sort of lanceolating leaf, and they look amazing. But I can't see any parsnip forming on the top of the soil. That's the key, really. A bit like carrots. I like seeing the top of the root.
Sort of poking out.
Yeah, I like seeing the top.
The shoulders coming up.
I think the heat is. Parsnips always associated a bit more of a cooler climate plant, anyway. Yeah. So you say you're going to start them late. I mean, I would start them probably on toilet rolls now, somewhere cooler off-site, and then transplant them. You get them germinated quicker and see how you go.
Okay, so I will still do that and report back.
Yeah, do that. But definitely just be aware that it's been very hot and they might be putting on a lot of top growth, but not necessarily forming their big roots. So just be aware of that.
Okay, all right. And then I have missed the window for sweet corn. Although I know last year you were really late and got away with it.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
So I sowed them really late. You're right, because I re-sowed a lot of stuff because we had quite heavy conditions, didn't we? And but if you think it's too late to sow seed, because I germinate a lot of my sweet corn on open ground. I just sow them open ground, but you can buy them as plugs or small plants as well. So
could probably still sneak some in.
Yeah, I would probably late. I would probably go for the plugs. And so they've got a root. They've already got established root on them. Okay. And then you can put them in and they still get away.
Still invest. I do absolutely love it. It's still worth doing. In terms of my seed, I have sown amaranth across. I sowed it underneath my wigwams.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Oh, it's just off it's going, and it is the most fascinating plant to watch as it develops because the colour is extraordinary. And at the moment, it's kind of at that big seedling stage. I've sown it a bit thickly, and that's because you just sort of can't help yourself because the seed is teeny tiny. But I can thin it out. But that's been a joy. I'm going to sow some fennel. Now is a great time to sow some fennel. Tomatoes are doing fine in the greenhouse. I've had lots and lots of nasturtium plants. They all germinated really well, and I've got them dotted around everywhere. So it's been quite exciting, actually, this year. That lots of things have succeeded, which kind of then encourages you, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I mean, this July really is what I call my second wave because I then sow. So we've had a lot of problems with bolting, things like lettuce and stuff. It's because of the heat. It likes to bolt in the heat, and the day length affects it. Spinach, I already mentioned. But I just re-sow. A lot of those crops I'm re-sowing. So they've been really well used up till this point. The plants are looking a bit tired of bolting, so I get rid of those and I now re-sow as well. I'll put spring onions in as well. All those sort of salad plants I'll go again. Even runner beans, you can pop a few seeds in the ground and they'll come up and do some business as well. So can't keep going. If you see gaps, it's not too late in the season. If you see gaps, to fill those gaps with food. Later in the season, when the day length starts to decrease, that's when you might start thinking about green manures and stuff for the gaps as they appear.
Yeah, okay. So we'll try and get ready for that, try and get ahead for that. I'm wanting to make sure I've got some seed. I know we've got some really good advice online because green manures differ in terms of success rates, don't they? Because in some parts of the country, certain things work really well, and in other parts of the country, different things work well. We've done quite a lot of work around that, quite a lot of research around that. So it's well worth looking at the Garden Organic website. Although your green manure of choice is...
It's mustard. I think it's interesting. I think it can be quite site specific as well. So some stuff does well on other sites. And I tend to get really good results with mustard, so I tend to stick with that, really.
Yeah, okay. So lots of direct sowing still to do, which is so kind of fun to think it's still not too late, and it's July. Keep going. As you say, it's your second wave. And if it isn't your second wave and it's perhaps your first wave, doesn't matter. Just get on with it. Just get out and sow.
The season is not over. No. We're only halfway through it. So we've got time.
Absolutely. Seed is meant to be sown. That's one of my mottos.
Yeah.
But, of course, it has been dry. And what are you doing to try and, nurse your growing patch through that?
Yeah, it's while their plants are establishing is the real issue. When they're younger, they'll need the moisture. So I've been busy. My watering cancelling a lot of action, I can tell you.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing I really notice is timing when you're doing it watering-wise. There's two things I'd say. There's when you're watering and also mulching. They're the two main things at the moment. Watering, do it first thing in the morning or do it late in the evening because it just penetrates the soil. And I can water my allotment. I usually water it after work. So I can be down there 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. And I water there, and then I can then go in the next morning and I can see that the moisture's been
still there.
Yeah, I can see the darker patches. So it's doing its job. Or you can do it first thing in the morning. So if you're sort of watering at 2 in the afternoon in this weather, it's gone in 20 minutes, you're not hitting anything. And you can always tell, if you want to test, you might look at the soil's damp after watering, put your big pinky in and you'll find it's bone dry underneath, and then you mean it's not getting watered. Yeah. But also for plants like courgettes and stuff, I tend to put mulches in. I'm starting to utilise my compost a bit to put mulch in because that helps the soil retain the moisture. Soil health, really, if you've got a good organic soil, you've had lots of compost to it over the years, will do a better job of retaining moisture than one you've neglected.
Yeah, okay. As we talk a lot about compost here at Garden Organic, but we also talk about it a lot on the podcast too. Yes, it's absolutely key to soil health. My soil, I have to say, I'm a bit disappointed this year. It feels very dry, quite sandy in that top few inches. Don't feel like it's retaining the moisture. I haven't seen as many earthworms as I would like to have seen, possibly because it's so dry and it's maybe just that top layer.
I think the heat, I think the worms tend to go down.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll tend to head downwards as for the cooler soil, I expect. Yeah.
I mean, would you risk putting a compost that's not particularly rotted down yet?
No, I
would
wouldn't.
you still wait?
Yeah, I'd wait, because what happens when you put unrotted stuff on it, the stuff that breaks it down, the microorganisms tend to rely on nitrogen, so they'll suck the nitrogen out of the soil. So you're kind of going backwards a little bit with it.
Okay.
So I'll just wait. I would. If you can, if you've got ready-made compost, then mulching is definitely a good idea. But I'm pretty sure everybody's experiencing quite tough, dry conditions on the top few centimetres of their soil, just because it's been so warm.
Okay, so it's not just me.
Yeah.
So if you were going to mulch, just give us a few top tips about that. So what would you mulch with, and when would you mulch? We're a bit concerned there's, there could be hosepipe ban on the way. And
I think it's definitely on the way. I think certainly I would use my compost if I had. I mean, if I had run out of it, I would be very tempted. For things that are hungry, like you mentioned, runner beans, I would be quite tempted to buy a bag of rotted manure and be quite sparing with it. But I tend to puddle it when I mulch as well. If I'm directly mulching one plant, a specific plant, I'll put the mulch in a ridge away from the bottom of the plant, so any water that's going in is puddling.
Okay, so you're creating like this little sort of
a little dam exactly around the edge. So when you're watering, the water sits and then it goes, then it soaks into the ground. That's a good little tip, really.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Make it thick, about 5 centimetres if you've got a lot of it. So you're not going to do any harm with a good mulch at this time, especially in this heat.
Okay, and if people want a bit more depth on managing during kind of very dry conditions, we last June interviewed Sally Morgan on this podcast. She had loads of really, really good tips. So that's worth a listen if people are worried about the hot weather and the effect that's having on their growing. Right. Well, that's the height of summer, Chris. Let's enjoy every minute, eh?
Yes, I certainly intend to. I must say, although it's a little bit challenging horticulture, I absolutely love this weather. I really do.
Me too. Now on to our special guest. This month, I'm joined again by the seed detective, Adam Alexander. Adam's travelled the world gathering heritage and landrace vegetable seeds, and in his latest book tells the story of our accidental seed heroes. These are the farmers, plant breeders, scientists and ordinary gardeners doing something extraordinary. Instead of just growing standard seed that you can buy, they're championing traditional varieties, often with a local history, and they're also breeding new generations of fruit and vegetables. This is critical activity, as with climate change comes the great risk of food crop failure. I spoke with Adam about how seed heroes are such an important part of our food future. I'm here with Adam Alexander, who has written a book called The Accidental Seed Heroes. And it's such an intriguing title, Adam. Tell us, first of all, who are the seed heroes and why accidental?
Thank you for the two excellent questions, Fiona. And thank you, firstly, for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm honoured. So, who are the seed heroes? Well, originally, seed heroes were farmers because they were the people who were the plant breeders up until really the sort of invention of modern science 200 or so years ago. And why accidental seed heroes? Because they weren't deliberately going out and taking two different varieties and crossing them to try and come up with something different. They were observing what was happening in their fields and with their crops, and then selecting to save seeds from those parts of the crop that they felt they wanted to do more with. And that was based on, did they do well in the climate? Were they well adapted? Were they delicious? Were they heavy cropping? Lots and lots of different reasons. 200 years or so ago, we have essentially the creation of systematic plant breeding, and it moved, if you like, from the field into the laboratory. No longer a farmer, but a man or a woman in a white coat. But they were still accidental plant breeders because they were going through a process of crossing different varieties to see what they came up with. And if something interesting happened with that cross, they would then work with those crosses to help and improve and to develop them into something which they could then sell, basically. But it was still an accident, and that's because of how genes behave.
Indeed. So there's a huge amount of complexity behind this, but I love the humanity that is within this story, that it is down to human decision and human intervention to work out what crops best, and how best to feed your local constituency, whoever that is. I know you've travelled the world, over many years, and you're absolutely passionate about seed and different types of seed. I wonder, just in this book, have you got a favourite hero?
That's a good question. You and your good questions, Fiona. Have I got a favourite hero? Probably a favourite heroine. Mm-hmm. And she was a very unassuming woman who I met in a market in a little town called Delbo, which is sort of in the southern highlands of Ethiopia. And I'd gone into this market because I always go to markets, sniffing around, seeing what was there. And actually, what I was presented with was an unbelievable diversity of locally adapted, what we call land races or farmers' varieties of every conceivable crop, including, of course, modern cultivars that were being grown by farmers. In amongst all of these crops, there were a lot of tomatoes being sold, and I noticed that they were all the same. And I knew that the tomatoes that were being grown were from commercial, modern, hybrid cultivars. And then I found this lady, and she was growing a tomato which had an hourglass figure, dare I say, and it was completely different to anything else that I'd seen. And my wonderful driver, Amias, interviewed her, talked to her about it, and she had been growing this tomato as long as she could remember, as had her family. And it was very nice. She gave me one to eat, and I would say it was primarily for me a cooking tomato, but delicious. And she had with her daughter, who was a teacher who'd just finished at school. And I asked her daughter, I said, "Are you going to grow this tomato yourself on the farm?" And she said, "Yes, I'm going to continue to grow it." And with her was her granddaughter, who also said she wanted to continue the tradition of growing this variety. And I thought that completely encapsulated for me kind of what being a farmer, particularly an indigenous farmer in the global south, really means, and what that crop meant to them, that simple tomato.
And what would you say that those of us who perhaps grow our own tomatoes, go to the supermarket and see the various same varieties all the time, what do you think we can learn from her?
Well, I mean, it's easy for me to say because I grow all my own fruit and vegetables, and I seldom, if ever, buy anything. It's certainly not in the supermarket, very occasionally tomatoes, and I always do it holding my nose. So the first thing is, if it is at all possible, you should try and buy your tomatoes from somebody who has grown them locally. And that might mean that actually you're not eating tomatoes in March or April or maybe even in May, but at least you know that the tomatoes that you are buying are of a different order to the ones that you're getting in a supermarket, which are bred for staying power, for storage, for uniformity. So those of you listening, I would say, if you can, always grow your own. And if you can't, try and source it locally.
And when you were in that market in Ethiopia, what was your sense of how many other people were growing different types of fruit and vegetables and food locally?
Everybody is the short answer. One of the interesting things about when one spends time in countries where essentially the majority of the population are working on the land, and let's not forget that the majority of people in the world, 60 or 70% of the global population, relies on food being grown on farms of less than 5 acres.
Then that's amazing, actually, just stop and think about that. One field, effectively, in our thinking. And the idea that that is what most people are dependent on for their fruit and veg the world over. It just seems almost impossible to fathom for us here when we are so distant from that.
Absolutely. So when one connects with, particularly with indigenous people, but it's not just with indigenous populations, you don't have to go far from these shores to find yourself in countries where there is a powerful culture of growing. Southern Europe, actually Eastern Europe, many, many places. And that visceral relationship they have with what they grow and eat, that fact that it is absolutely key and fundamental to their identity is actually kind of the big thing. That's what gets them all out of bed in the morning to go and work in their fields. And the other thing they have, which is a deep knowledge. So, that tomato, I was talking to 3 generations, the youngest of who was probably 5 or 6 years old, and the mother was certainly in her 60s. But I've been in fields with 5 generations, all intimately involved with the process of food production. I think it's very difficult sometimes for us, who are, we are a minority in terms of how we produce our food, and we're very, very detached from it. And we have a problem, which I think is, a colonial problem of we know best. So we don't respect farmers in the way that the rest of the world, or much of the rest of the world, does. And that is at our loss. It is terrible, because actually these people are the most important people. Without them, we ain't here.
So we've got much to learn. Obviously, I want to talk a little bit about the plant breeders themselves. As you said, the women and men in white coats, perhaps, rather than the farmers, and the way it has gone, which perhaps then has removed that sense of local knowledge, that sense of being in touch with the land. But at the same time, the food security issues around the world are very real, and climate change is very real. And we do, as a society, need to respond to that. And this is one of the ways that in our society we are responding to that. So are there some heroes amongst the plant breeders?
There certainly are many, many heroes amongst plant breeders, and plant breeders are an absolute fundamental key part of the solutions to how we feed ourselves in a sustainable way. I just want to, again, remind ourselves, 100 years ago, there were 2 billion people living on this planet. What have we got today? 8 billion, nearly 9 billion. There's only that many people on this planet because we're able to feed ourselves. And how did that happen? That happened, and it really kicked off after World War II, when an amazing plant scientist who won the Nobel Prize called Borlaug actually figured out, funnily enough, through conventional breeding, not molecular breeding, playing around with genes, how to produce very high yielding forms of wheat. And he transformed food system, first of all in Mexico, which was starving. And this all got picked up with other crops, maize, rice, the list is long. And it is because of this approach to plant breeding, which was actually creating monocultures, things that were genetically narrow, but achieved amazing targets. They needed lots of inputs, chemicals inputs. They had particular susceptibilities to diseases, so more herbicides and pesticides, etc., but loads of it. Great, we all got fed, but at a terrible, terrible price to the planet, which we are now well aware of. So the question is, how do you fix that and still feed 8, 9, 10 billion people? That's something that I've wanted to write about in the book, is that, first of all, we can do it. It is starting to happen. And I passionately believe that we need to remind ourselves of how we can be and are part of the solution rather than the problem. And so how modern plant scientists collaborate and work with farmers and growers, all sorts of different people, is key to it. So that one of the things you will read about in the book is something called participatory plant breeding, which is actually where the person in the white coat gets out in the field and asks the farmer, what matters to you? How is this working? And when the farmer becomes part of the whole breeding process, working with people who are often on the absolute cutting edge of working with genomics, actually remarkable things can happen. And so those to me these are really powerful or empowering stories, which I hope are a foil to the kind of existential dangers that we put ourselves into by the way that we have been producing our food, certainly in the last 100 years.
There's a definite fear and suspicion around elements of modern day plant breeding. You just talked about molecular interference, and yet there's a lot of resource dedicated to that now. Should we be fearful?
It's not the science, and it's actually not the people who are driven by their love and curiosity of genetics that we should be worried about. What we really need to fight against is the system of how we're producing food. So when genes can be copyrighted. When food is purely a commodity, which is somebody's intellectual property, then actually the farmer, the consumer, we all are excluded from that process. And this then becomes essentially all about how do you make profits for your shareholders. Now, I'm not advocating a revolution in terms of the economy. What I'm really advocating is what I call a counter-evolution, which is that we know we can breed and develop and maintain diversity of crops and come up with new cultivars and varieties that are highly adaptive, very heterogeneous. So in other words, we are broadening their genomes. We are embracing if you like, the historical memory of crops, the wild parents that have within their incredible genomes groups of genes that can fight off disease, can deal with drought or flood if it's too hot, too dry. And those, if we work in a collaborative way with plant scientists and farmers and growers and interested parties, actually, we can sort this problem.
I just want to go back to basics just for a minute in terms of how seeds in particular have an inbuilt ability to be resilient. And I just want to sort of explain that.
Okay, so up until 12,000 years ago, we were essentially hunter-gatherers. We were certainly doing quite a lot of really important work in terms of selecting what it was that we wanted to eat, but we weren't planting it in fields as the way we do now. So 12,000 years ago, we became settled farmers for lots and lots of different reasons. And that was when the process of selecting and allowing accidents to happen, most importantly with cereals, enabled us to suddenly start to grow more food than we ourselves needed, which meant that you could have one person who could grow enough food for 10 people or 20 people or a city.
And I suppose the beauty of that is that each time that seed was sown, it was telling a different story. It was growing in a different way. And that is what gave those early accidental plant breeders the information they needed to move forward to select those more resilient varieties. I think it's something that today, now, many gardeners are unaware that actually if they've grown a variety in their garden and it's done particularly well, the best thing they can do is save the seed and sow that seed again. And I don't understand what it is about the seed, biologically that does that. It absolutely blows my mind. And I just wonder if you could unpack that a bit.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So, first of all, many plants have incredibly complex genomes, not simple ones like us, where we just need two parents and two sets of genes combining, crossing, and you've got a different person. Actually, if you are a breadweed, you are the result of the mixing of three completely different species of grass. As a wonderful guy told me, he said, if you're a modern wheat variety, it's a bit like being a human, but you have three kidneys, not two. So this complexity is the result of, as I've said, about accidents happening in the field through accidental mutation, crossing of different species, which is very, very rare and unusual, but happens more with certain types of plants than with others. Then human intervention, we notice the difference, we then start selecting those seeds and we grow more and more and more of them. And actually then out of them evolves, classic example is bread wheat. But actually within that incredibly long complex genome is the history that or those different species when they were wild parents. And I'm not talking 12,000 years ago when we started domesticating. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of years ago when you had wild grasses growing in an evolving planet where, believe you me, if we worry about climate change now, those amazing plants were evolving and surviving in some pretty challenging environments. And that memory still sits within the genetics, which is why today suddenly, hey, modern plant scientists, what do they want to do? They want to go back to the wild parents. They're going back off plant hunting again to look where are the wild parents of certain things that we haven't seen before, and what is it in those genomes that we might be able to now utilize to develop and breed new cultivars that will thrive in our changing environment.
How can any of us be a seed hero?
Well, I hate to call myself a seed hero. It's not for me to call myself one. But I think anybody who saves seeds is already doing something incredibly important and positive for building resilience into our food system.
Okay, why?
Okay, because there's what we call evolutionary plant breeding. So if you save seeds year after year, just like farmers have been doing for millennia, what you're doing is you're essentially encouraging adaptiveness and adaptability, because you are growing something that is heterogeneous. It's very genetically diverse. It's open pollinated, which means essentially you get the following generation the same as the previous generation. And the seed that you need to save of that part of the crop that means the most to you, you save the seed from the best tomatoes. You select, you don't just randomly take any old seed and save it. You look at your crop of beans and you think, I really like those pods. They're lovely and long. The beans inside them are beautiful. Those are the ones I'm going to save. I've got 10 peas in this pod. I'm going to save those seed. And so by actually consciously selecting the best of your crop and looking after it over the years, they get more and more used to growing in what they call home. And I've found this, I've been doing this for a long time now. And one of the stories I tell is, which I wrote about in my first book, which was about what got me started, which was the Donetsk pepper. Well, that pepper, I've been growing it for 35 years. I've probably got 25 accessions, 25 generations of seed. And although I play around with earlier seed to see how it's doing and how much things have changed, that pepper, it's the earliest to flower, it's the first to crop, and I can grow it outside.
So it's the strongest, it's really strong crop now, and really reliable crop and delicious. And that's why you're growing it. Yeah. Absolutely. But through that process each year, is it true to say that as it were, that the seed is kind of switching on the relevant genes that are in its background in order to survive? I
think what one thinks about, when you think about the seed, and when it's very genetically diverse, heterogeneous seed, but tomato is a good example, that actually it's all of that knowledge that's embedded in the genome, all that information only comes into play when required. And it's quite interesting because, there are a lot of genes. You look at the genome of a plant, people don't know what those genes are for. There's huge gaps. And a lot of those genes, are they really doing anything at all? Probably not at the moment, but they're still there, and their moment can come. There's a lovely bit in the book where the term recalcitrant vegetables is used. These are vegetables that sort of refused to play when it came to plant breeding. And I just wanted you to explain that a bit more. I think that's a wonderful term, and I know there's a story attached to it. Well, I relate to recalcitrant vegetables big time. Recalcitrant vegetables can respond very well to conventional breeding, which is in many ways simple crossing, although you can use mutagenics with many of these species to develop new cultivars. In other words, you bombard them with radiation to force mutations and then see what it conjures up. But what recalcitrant crops don't respond to is to molecular plant breeding. They don't like their genomes being messed around with by something called, CRISPR. They just don't, they refuse to play. And actually that's great, because what it means is the big plant breeders, they ignore them. It's too much like hard work. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time trying to develop a new, genetically modified sweet pepper, because actually it doesn't want to play ball. So we're just going to leave it to a more conventional approach to breeding to come up with the results we want. And you have wonderful crops, we call them orphan crops, which are the ones that have been neglected by the big plant breeders because there's not enough money in it, they're too complicated to deal with, the market is too small, and thereby lies the amazing opportunity we as growers have ourselves in our gardens to actually build resilience into our crops by saving seeds and ensuring on local diversity and adaptability, but also for a huge cohort of plant breeders around the world who are the other real seed heroes that I write about. And they are freelance plant breeders. A lot of them are commercial plant breeders, small scale, and mad amateurs. There's a wonderful guy, Søren Holt, who I met in Denmark, who just had a thing about he wants to breed an aubergine he can grow outside in Denmark. He has one. He's called it Black Raven. And it's eccentric, to say the least. But actually, he's doing something that no traditional plant breeder would ever think of doing. Where's the money? But actually, he's sharing his seeds with fellow growers who now can grow a locally adapted, actually farmer's variety, a landrace in Denmark of an aubergine grows outside, come hell or high water.
And you'd never be able to find that at the garden centre.
You certainly would not be able to find it. I mean, that's the other great joy of saving seeds and also sharing seeds. And the other thing is buying seeds that are heterogeneous and open pollinated and particularly from this wonderful new generation of small independent plant breeders and seed sellers who actually will tell you how to save seeds. I mean, you'd have thought this is not a way to build a business, but actually it's wonderful that they are encouraging their customers to try things out. If you like it, why don't you save those seeds yourself? The truth is, most of us will still go and buy something different and new from them. But equally, when we save the seeds of those varieties, particularly if they've been originally imported, we can then start to continue this process of adaptiveness. Something that started its life in southern Italy can find a new life for itself in slightly damp East Wales.
So you've travelled the world and you've done an awful lot of research for this book. I wonder if you can bring something to life here in the UK about how we can be part of the solution, how we can adapt. We've talked about saving our own seed and growing our own seed, but I wonder if you've got a particular example of real local resilience that you've come across here in the UK.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think the prime example for me, funnily enough, of all the vegetables that we grow is the runner bean. And I live in a part of, South Wales, which is synonymous with a huge diversity of runner beans. Actually, they're known in the parlance as land races. I actually call them gardeners' varieties because these are crops that have been selected and maintained by countless gardeners not only in South Wales, but across the UK. And what is so, to me, sort of empowering and exciting about that is that when I talk to growers about what's the runner bean that you're growing, they say, well, I grow Brecon Black because it's my local bean and it's really good and it's reliable and I always get a crop and it tastes good. That's enough. That's a proof positive that growing, saving and conserving locally adapted varieties is a sure way that you're going to get beans on your plate.
And when we think of those smaller subsistence farmers around the world, which we don't have much experience of here, although we do have community supported agriculture, and I belong to a scheme that is literally called 5 acres. So, it's got the same principles, but you do have to seek that out. It's not embedded in our culture. And really, I think the message of your book, if I may, is actually look back and see what we've always done and make sure we're still doing it.
I agree. I think, I'm not a great one for turning the clock back. I want to take all the positives and learnings from the past and look at how do we apply them in the real world today. And that past knowledge is absolutely fundamental to coming up with the approaches and the solutions that we need to make sure that, we can feed 10 billion people, but we can also nourish the planet. We can restore ecosystems. We can put carbon back in our soils. We can put that biodiversity back into this planet, which we've been doing a very good job of trying to destroy in the last century.
Time now for your questions. We've got some cracking things to talk about this month. as we're in high summer, I think we're all dealing with some similar issues and similar problems. So looking forward to getting stuck into this. So I'm here with Dr. Anton Rosenfeld and, of course, Chris Collins. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Fiona.
Hi.
Okay, first question. Can you share any tips for managing aphids? I mean, goodness me, this is such a huge topic. And I've certainly noticed aphids appearing in the last few weeks, actually. I thought we were doing fine, and then quite a lot of aphids on some of my crops at home. So, Anton, first sort of sub-question here is, can you just explain to us what aphids actually are?
Okay, so they're small insects which have a really interesting life cycle. They often spend their time on different plants in the winter to the summer. For example, there's an aphid called the lettuce currant aphid that we often find on lettuces, and it will overwinter on gooseberry bushes. And during that time, they sort of reproduce very, very slowly. And then a few of them will form wings, and then they will fly onto your lettuces in the spring. And then while times are good, they have the opportunity to reproduce asexually. So basically females give birth to more live females, and often a female can give birth to about 2 or 3 new females every day. So that's why you see them sort of multiplying
in front of your eyes almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
The main sort of damage they do to your plants is often the feeding damage that they do, but one of the main things as well is they often transmit viruses and diseases as well, which is what makes people worry about.
Okay. And what conditions do they thrive in?
So they tend to really thrive under hot, dry conditions.
That will explain it then.
My experience is you get a wet season, you get lots of diseases. If you get a dry season, you get lots of sort of pests.
That's a heck of a rule of thumb. Do you agree with that, Chris? You know, wet year, dry year?
Yes, I would agree totally. That seems to be the case, isn't it? And this just proves the point, really, isn't it? Because it's been a bit of a bonanza for aphid.
Yeah. And which plants have you noticed them on?
Well, I get the sort of usual suspects, I suppose. On the allotment, I broad bean is a classic, really. The black fly and the broad bean. On ornamentals, I tend to roses. I always associate them with roses. What they like is that lovely tender apical growth, that soft apical growth.
Green
yeah, and that's what they're aiming for. So in many ways, removal of that. So my broad beans, when they get a certain height and the beans are starting to form a bit, I will pinch out the tops of them. Actually, they're quite nice to eat. They taste of peas as well.
Yeah,
so you
it's
can put
lovely.
them in a salad. But yeah, so that's one sort of method of precaution I would take. The other is I plant to try and combat them as well. So I plant fennel. I love fennel anyway. I'm a big fish eater, so that kind of helps. And so I let that flower, and that will bring in hoverfly. And then hoverfly larvae is ferocious, really. That hoverfly larvae will eat up to 500 aphids a day. So it's a good year to be a hoverfly larvae, I would say, because there's plenty of grub out there.
Yeah, plenty of food out there. Yeah. Okay, so I think we've all got that experience of them. And you touched on grow lots of flowers and encourage predators. But let's think about that a little bit more. I mean, which specific predators are we trying to attract here?
So we went out into the garden yesterday and looked for some.
Yes,
And
as you do.
There was quite a bonanza of predators that we saw yesterday, which was quite encouraging, really. We saw plenty of ladybirds. They're the ones that most people are familiar with, but people are perhaps not so familiar with the ladybird larvae as well, which are they're sort of dark, sort of grey or purple, slightly elongated, and they have sort of slight orange markings on them as well. They look quite funky.
I think they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. They would, if you didn't know it was a ladybird larva, you just wouldn't associate it with ladybirds at all, would you?
The sort of young stage of these things look totally different from the sort of adults as well. Yeah. Quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So the other things which are really, really common are hoverflies.
Yes.
So a hoverfly, the adult, is a sort of gentle creature. It looks a bit like a wasp, but it hovers around and it eats pollen and nectar. So it basically is a vegetarian. But its children are absolutely voracious thugs. So they are tiny little sort of maggots.
Okay.
You recognize them because they travel pointed end first, and they wiggle their pointy end around looking for aphids. But the danger is you might think this is a pest because it looks a little bit like a maggot. If you weren't familiar with it, you might sort of squash it. So you need to leave those on.
Leave those on. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the most gruesome of these is the parasitic wasps. And most people just think of wasps as they're sort of annoying black and yellow stripy things which annoy you at a pub or a picnic. But Actually, there's about sort of 6,000 species of wasps, and a lot of them are so small that we don't even really notice them. And this is one of them. They are tiny little black flies. I recognize them because you can see the long antennae on them, and you'll find them sort of hanging around aphids, and they inject their eggs into the aphids, and then the larva sort of actually develops within the aphid and then bursts its way out as an adult a bit later, just like on Alien. It's really quite gruesome.
It's a good lesson in organic gardening that you need patience. You need observation and patience, because those things will resolve if you don't interfere with the ecology of it all, I suppose. And then now and again you'll get a heavy infestation. That's inevitable. The weather might cause it or something. But overall, if you sit back and certainly with the ladybirds, the experience I've had is I won't panic about black fly, and they've come along, the larvae have come along and solved the problem for me a bit further down the line. So that kind of patience and observation is a key part of what to do, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. There's a great organic veg farm down in Berkshire, close to the River Thames. They've been going for years. It's called Tolhurst Organic Produce. And I went for a look around there last year, and they have the cleanest brassica crops, and he hasn't sprayed for years, not even used any sort of organic sprays. But he actually allows a lot of his brassica crops to flower once they're over with. And through that, he encourages lots of the sort of parasitic wasps.
Oh, I see.
That's a really great tip.
Yeah, so you leave one or two of them to run to flower, run to seed, all the rest of it. And that will actually then attract in the right predators that you need. That's an amazing idea. Yeah. Okay. I did just want to ask you a little bit about ants, because it's the time of year now where there's an awful lot of ants around as well. And you do seem to see that ants and aphids quite often go together. Is that a bad thing? What's going on there?
Well, there's what the ants like about the aphid is the aphid, as they suck the glucose out of the plant, they produce a thing called honeydew, which is basically aphid poo, for want of an expression. And what the ants quite like this stuff.
Yes, delicious.
It's sweet. It's like an angel delight of the ant world. Okay, so they go and farm it. And they take it back and give it to their young and stuff. So what happens then is the ants have got cards in the game, basically. So when the predators like the ladybirds come along, the ants will defend the aphids. So they protect them in order to farm the honeydew off the aphids. So it's a big problem for a horticulturist, because what will happen then as the honeydew starts to cover the leaf, sooty mold really loves growing in honeydew. So you then get this really bad, you can end up with this really bad infection of sooty molds as well. So it's particularly bad in greenhouses. That's where I've occurred the problem. So the idea really is, if you want to stop it, I would keep the aphid numbers down. It's when the aphid numbers get high, the ants are more likely to take an interest, basically.
Okay. And I mean, of course, it kind of goes without saying, but I want to say it anyway. As much of a polyculture as we can have amongst our food growing is surely the best way for this, and avoiding too much of one thing.
Definitely, yeah. Mix up your crops, because obviously once you've got all of one thing, then the aphids really go for it. And making sure that you've got plenty of things to feed the predators as well. So the adults always like a plentiful supply of pollen and nectar, particularly things like the hoverflies. They like the really sort of open flower structures. So anything in the carrot family is really, really good. So, yeah, fennel's good because it's a perennial, so it flowers quite early. We've tried growing buckwheat as well as a really good one for hoverflies. It's so quick to flower. You chuck a seed on the ground, and within about 6 weeks, you've got these really tall plants which are flowering as well. So that's a good one to have a go at.
Okay, lots to go with there. Absolutely fascinating. We could go on for hours.
You could write a PhD on it.
It's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So now we're on to something that's not dissimilar, actually. A few people have written in about this. So here we go. I have a problem with my spinach and chard plants. They look perfectly healthy. Then they suddenly develop lightening of the leaves and they discolor rapidly. Last year, I found a grub inside the main vein of the leaf. On the underside, I can see a row of very small white eggs along with some aphids. What is this and what can I do about it? Anton, I think you've got the answer. What is this?
So it's almost certainly beet leaf miner. So this is a pest that was originally a real problem in sugar beet. So it was really mainly restricted to sort of Norfolk and Suffolk, where most of our sugar beet is grown. And it looks like a sort of small housefly that just lays its eggs. And then the grub actually lives between the layers of the leaf, like a leaf is got two what are called lamina, the sort of the sheets of the leaf, and it tunnels its way between that. So you start to see all these trails around on your leaf, and then these start to all sort of meet up, and you end up with just leaves which are unusable. If you peel the leaf apart, you can actually find the maggots as well, which is quite grim.
So it makes it really inedible. So for chard and spinach, I mean, I've noticed them on beetroot. Would it affect the root of the beetroot, or is it just that it's just affecting the top?
So it would only affect the root of the beetroot if it's enough to really damage the leaves a lot,
Right.
Less photosynthesis from the leaves.
Okay.
Yeah. So this thing is mainly a problem between April and October. They lay their eggs about sort of 2 or 3 generations during that time. We did a survey of it last year, and we found that it wasn't just restricted to East Anglia. It's in quite a lot of places in the country. Yeah, hadn't reached as far north as Scotland, but definitely a sort of widespread problem. And it seems to be something that was a bit of a nuisance a few years ago, but it seems to be becoming more than a nuisance now.
And it affects the whole crop generally, or can you kind of sort of pick your way amongst it?
It depends how bad it is. I mean, quite often I find you get a bit of an infestation, you can remove those leaves and it's not too much of a problem. But over the last few years, I've noticed it get quite a bit worse, I think.
Yeah. Okay. How do you deal with it? Is this one that's got a predator or not?
The way I deal with it, it's a bit of a mindset, really. It's that perhaps chard, I'm not so bothered about eating it over the summer because I've got plenty of other sort of summer crops. I just keep it going over the summer, perhaps remove the affected leaves, and then by about October sort of time, the pest is packed up and gone. It's not such a problem, and then you can still be harvesting the chard as a winter crop. The main thing you need to watch out for is that the grub overwinters as a pupa in the soil. So you don't want to be putting your affected leaves into the compost. Okay. Unless your compost gets really hot, of sort of 45 degrees, you're going to find that you're basically creating compost which has got the sort of pupae in there, and you're spreading them around for next year.
Okay. So we do need to be careful and vigilant and try and stop the spread as much as we can, I guess. And I think that whole thing about removing, dead, diseased and dying leaves, which you talk about a lot, Chris, don't you? We do need to be vigilant about these sorts of pests.
Especially with edibles. I'm a bit more relaxed about a shrub or something, but certainly with edibles, I don't want to encourage. There's a lot of pest and disease that will come into what I call secondary. They'll come and attack a plant that's already in a weakened situation.
And moving on now to tomato plants. My tomatoes have developed curling on the leaves that has spread around the glasshouse. I'm worried that this might be a virus or herbicide contamination. Gosh, okay, that is a worry. Chris, you've been talking about your tomatoes this week and you noticed a little bit of leaf curl. Tell us what that looked like and what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think that you have to be a bit careful when you see this because people tend to panic again. We've talked about panic before. There's something badly wrong. But it's actually quite natural for a tomato. Leaves to curl under certain conditions. And I've certainly observed it. So we've having this really hot weather. It's very common. And they just curl around the edges, really. It almost sort of, concave almost in a way. So it's quite dramatic to look at. But it's usually heat associated, maybe moisture levels associated. One of my gardens the other day, and I noticed it on a lot of tomatoes. The tomatoes are incredibly healthy, by the way. They're enjoying this weather, I think, most of them. Yeah. And a lot of curling went on. And then actually, as the evening got cooler, they're curling
straightened out. Because it's going to be far worse in a greenhouse, isn't it?
It certainly is. And you get it outside as well. I've seen it outside as well. And so don't panic. I think, obviously, again, go and inspect what's going on. There might be other reasons. It could be a virus. They do get viruses, mosaic viruses. If that's the case, you'll get mottling on the leaves. Those viruses could be brought in by vectors, such as aphids. So check the underneath of the leaf as well to see if that's where your problem is. Usually it's not the case, though. I'd find that most of the time it's just a reaction to the heat or to the temperatures or to maybe the moisture levels in the plant. So just have a look, see what's going on, make sure there's no mottling, make sure you're not infected with too many aphids, and then wait till the evening and see if it reverses. That's probably a good tip, yeah.
Okay, all right. And if you don't like the look of some of the leaves, remove the leaves and see what happens. It's all observation, isn't it? The worse it gets, you might have to remove the plant altogether.
If you've got mottling and virus, I would certainly, I'll get rid of it and I'll put it in a green waste bin because you don't want that spreading. And any aphid that lands on a mosaic infected tomato will then go off and infect another one. So you want to get it out as quick as possible.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's really interesting that this person is asking about herbicide contamination because I think, well, where would that come in?
So just firstly, to distinguish between what the difference would be between herbicide contamination and heat stress. The heat stress, I find, Chris, that the leaves at the bottom seem to be worse affected, whereas the virus or the herbicide contamination, they tend to be more at the top.
Okay.
So it's a newer leaf that seems to get it more. But with the herbicide contamination, the leaves will probably start to look pretty distorted as well, like actually quite unusual shapes. Like you say, you might wonder where on earth this is coming in. The main places it could come in is if you're using manures, where it gets basically the person who's keeping the horses might have sprayed the paddock with aminopyrrolate herbicides. I think we've talked about this quite a few times already. And then that goes through onto the horse muck and then gets applied to the tomatoes. It could possibly come in green waste compost. Yeah. It shouldn't really do, because if it's been past 100 tested, they will have done some sort of tests for it, but still there could be some sort of residual amounts in there. So the stuff that goes into green waste compost, it could be because people would be spraying their grass against broadleaf weed.
And then they're putting their cuttings into their green waste bin.
Often you get these people who get someone who comes round and sort of treats their lawn for them as well. And they put a sort of cocktail of fertilizers and herbicides on the leaves, again, perhaps try and discourage that from happening.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we all want to support the green waste cycle, and actually, buying some bags of green waste from your local council is a good thing in a way. I know we can't be absolutely sure and we can tie ourselves in nuts about organic, but it's a sustainable way of making sure that green waste is processed.
I think our target is, as Anton says, is to discourage people from using them in the first place. It isn't getting into the chain, is it?
Yeah.
That's kind of, I suppose, to avoid it, would you use certified materials? Is that the way around it? If you wanted it to be definitely organic?
It is tricky because basically I don't think there are any sort of green waste treatments which will just have organic stuff going into them. It's just it couldn't be that choosing if you kept it on your own site. But the past 100 test, it's basically a quality assurance for your green waste compost. And they will have actually done some what are called bioassay tests for herbicides. So they will actually grow some plants, and they usually grow clover or bean plants, which are really susceptible to the herbicide, and test them to see whether they've sort of show any symptoms of herbicide damage.
Okay, so if you've gone into your greenhouse and your tomato leaves are curling and you've gone through the list of things that we've talked about, is there any last advice that you would offer in that scenario?
Like me, if you're sort of out at work for most of the day, you don't quite realise how hot your greenhouse is getting during the middle of the day. Like in the morning, I open it up and it's quite cool in there, and then I come back in the evening and it's
sweltering.
It's quite hot, but still probably not aware of how hot it has got during the middle of the day.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so make sure it's well opened. I also, you can use glasshouse paint on the side, on the south facing. You can use that white paint on there. It does clean off quite easily afterwards. I get sheet of fleece and hang it down there as a shade, and I can actually see the tomatoes which are behind the fleece are growing stronger than the ones which are near an open window. They actually do definitely prefer it. You could also use green shade netting as well. I
mean, all of this is very seasonal, isn't it? These issues that we're talking about, but actually gardening in much hotter temperatures and extremes of temperatures, we're just going to be talking more and more about this, aren't we, as time goes on? So thank you so much for your questions. Please keep them coming, because it enables us to really find out more and make sure we get more information out there. So great to talk to you both this time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, Fiona.
That's all we've got time for this month. Thanks so much to Chris and Anton for their help with your questions. And thanks again to Adam Alexander. You can get his new book, The Accidental Seed Heroes, at all major book retailers. If you want to find out more about how you can also be part of saving seeds for future generations, have a look at our website. The link you need is gardenorganic.org.uk HSL, which stands for Heritage Seed Library. Thanks so much to Kevin MacLeod for the music, and we'll see you next time.